I'm going to show you how to make tofu out of chickpeas in 2 different ways. First, we'll make a strained version, and finally a zero-waste chickpea tofu that you can flavor in whichever way you like. Okay, let's clear up any confusion. This is not the Chinese tofu you would get at most grocery stores. This one is actually inspired by Burmese tofu, which is a traditional street food from Burma that is made with chickpea flour, turmeric and water, opposed to Chinese tofu that is made with curdled soybean milk. You can find the recipe for the 2 tofus we're making today, as well as for Burmese tofu and this tofu salad, in the description below. For now, let's make our chickpea tofu. If you can, try to source some locally grown chickpeas. They are a nitrogen-fixing crop and a great way to support a local sustainable cycle. Start by soaking 200 grams of the chickpeas overnight or for at least 8 hours in plenty of water. You want to cover them with around 3 times their volume, so make sure to choose a large bowl for this because they will expand a lot. This is before soaking and this is after soaking. Once they have soaked enough, just drain them through a fine sieve and discard the leftover soaking water. Then add them to a food processor or blender and pulse them a few times to break down slightly, scraping down the sides at the end. They will still look very coarse like this, which is perfectly fine. Pulsing them just makes it easier to process them in our next step. Now you can add around 500 milliliters of water and blend the chickpeas until smooth. Depending on the machine, this can take a few minutes, but just keep going or switch to a blender if they don't break down at all. The blended chickpeas should look somewhat like this, which you can then pass through a fine sieve directly into a saucepan. Then use a spoon to squeeze out as much liquid as possible. Okay, so now the biggest question is what to do with the pulp. We won't be using it in this recipe anymore, but my favorite way to actually use it is to add it to soups, stews or curries as a natural way to thicken them. But if you want to avoid it altogether, stick around until later in the video when I show you how to make a chickpea tofu without any waste. Back to our chickpea milk. The starches in the liquid will naturally sink to the bottom, so give it a whisk to loosen them, otherwise they will burn and stick to the pan. At this point you can season it with half a teaspoon salt. Then turn on the heat and bring it to a gentle boil, whisking it the entire time to avoid it from sticking. When it begins to bubble, reduce the heat to a simmer and keep whisking for around 1 minute until it starts to thicken into a paste. It will stick to the whisk like this, and when it falls onto itself, it won't instantly level out. You want a thick, slow running consistency. Just cook it a little longer if it's not there yet. Now just pour it into a mold. I'm using a 500 ml glass container. Smoothen out the top and leave it to set for about 1 hour, ideally in the fridge. Once it's set, it should easily loosen from the sides. You should be able to turn it out like this and slice it with a knife. If it hasn't properly set, the beans are still raw and you should not eat the tofu, but cook it for a little longer next time. If it has set properly, you can eat it straight away, but I usually cut it into cubes and fry it with a bit of salt and some oil in a non-stick frying pan until it becomes golden and slightly crispy. Now let's make it again, but this time we're using all the chickpeas without straining. For this version, we're starting by soaking 100 grams of chickpeas overnight until they have expanded like this. This time I'm using a high-speed blender to process the chickpeas so that we can get them as smooth as possible. I'm also flavoring them with 10 grams of ginger, you don't even need to peel it, and 1 trimmed chili. Pulse it to break up the chickpeas, then add 250 milliliters of water and blend it for at least 1 minute on high speed until completely smooth. Because we're not straining them this time, the fibers and starches will stick to the pan much more, so I'm using a non-stick frying pan instead. Just add the blended chickpeas along with a quarter teaspoon of turmeric and half a teaspoon of salt and stir it well to combine. Then repeat the same steps as before. Turn on the heat until it begins to thicken into a paste. Then lower the flame and continue cooking the paste for around 2 to 3 minutes, stirring constantly until it has thickened completely like this. It should stick to your spatula and not be liquid at all. Now transfer it again to a 500 milliliter mold, smoothen out the top and let it set for an hour. Once it's set, this is the result. A slightly denser chickpea tofu that you can again slice with a knife and eat straight away, but also cut into cubes and fry in a non-stick pan with some oil and salt until golden and crispy. There you go, 2 different ways to make chickpea tofu. I prefer the second one just because you can flavor it any way you like, you have all the nutrients from the chickpeas, and you don't have any waste. But the first one is a little more refined in texture and closer to Burmese tofu that you get when making it with chickpea flour. If you like this video, hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments what I should cook next. Wunderbar!